first time we really heard the defense's theory of the case, that this was a shakedown by Stormy Daniels and Cohen made these payments on his own, and that the reason that the payments to Cohen were booked as legal expenses were that they were really legal expenses, and it was an advanced retainer. And that's the argument that might be difficult for jurors to believe because, in Trump's own words, he didn't like to pay vendors and like to negotiate them down. So to pay almost $500,000 in an upfront retainer may be a bridge too far for jurors to believe.
So you weren't all that impressed with the closing argument by the defense?
I think the defense did the best job they could under the circumstances. I fully expected them to put up an accountant or someone from the Trump org to really explain why these entries were labeled legal expenses as opposed to something else. That's something that defense attorney Todd Blanche mentioned during his opening statement, but the defense never delivered on. So really it's a question of, will jurors hold it against the defense, or will they believe this story that no matter what came from a lawyer, any invoice that would automatically be labeled a legal expense by the accounting department?
Neama, the defense mentioned several times, kind of reminding the jury, this case is not a referendum on their views of Donald Trump. This is a case on these 34 felony counts of falsifying business documents. How difficult do you think it is for this jury to put their views of Trump aside? I know they said they could during jury selection and all that, but realistically, is some of that still at play here as we get toward the finish line?
The irony is, outside the courtroom, Donald Trump and his family members are railing against our legal system, but inside the courtroom, his lawyers are asking the jurors to really apply reasonable doubt and all the standards that they're supposed to and to follow the law. I think normally it would be difficult for jurors to decide this case because it's so politicized. But one thing unique about this case is that we have two lawyers on that panel. That never happens. It's rare to even have one lawyer juror. But now that you have two, I think lawyers are trained to sort of tune out the noise and decide cases based on the facts and evidence of that case. And I think that those two lawyers on the panel will be able to guide this jury to the right result.
Do you think having two lawyers on the jury hurts or helps either side?
I think it cuts both ways. I think lawyers on the panel will be able to tune out irrelevant facts, such as, political biases for or against Donald Trump. Frankly, a lot of the Stormy Daniels allegations really have nothing to do with the case, whether the affair happened and, the sordid details and scandal of that affair. Ultimately, this is a case about business records. Were they false? And were they in furtherance of or to cover up another crime? So on one hand, they may hurt the defense because a lot of what Cohen and Daniels said isn't necessarily relevant to the charges here. But in one way, it may hurt the prosecution. Even if the business records were false, the prosecution has to prove that election fraud or that campaign finance violation. And that is an additional legal hurdle. It's a convoluted legal argument. I'm not sure the lawyers and the other jurors on the panel will buy it. And if the prosecution is only able to secure misdemeanor convictions, I think that's a loss for the state in this case.
If convicted on all 34 counts, Donald Trump would face, I believe, up to 4 years in prison. What kind of sentence do you think the judge would actually hand down if there's a conviction here?
Michael, even if Trump is convicted of all felony counts, I don't think he's going to Rikers or any other New York State prison. Logistically, it would be a nightmare. These are just Class E felonies under New York law. Obviously, he has no criminal history. This is a probation case one way or another, regardless of whether the convictions are misdemeanors or felonies, in my opinion. Now, the other three cases, maybe not. We're talking about election fraud in D.C. and Georgia, unclassified documents in Florida. Those are much more serious cases. The question of whether Trump will ever go to trial on those cases, because if he's elected in November, all of his criminal problems go away. But I could potentially see him getting sentenced to prison if he's convicted in another case, but not in this New York case.
Former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani, always great to get your insight. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me, as always.